This is Sopheville's Dark Season presents The Dead Famous, Episode 7, with Ronald Moger as James Montague, Jonah Richert as the voice of the press, Hazel Young as Helen Beeston and Sister Anna Patrick, and Colin Rance as Geoffrey Montague. I was busy moving forwards in the queue while they craned their necks frantically to see where I might be. I smiled and said good day to the airline representative as they were alerting a policeman as to my potential wanted status, and their posse grew as he called in support from other terminals. It wasn't until I checked in my bag and turned away from the desk, tickets and boarding pass in hand, that I saw them. I knew there and then that I couldn't get my flight. I would be trapped and the police would just pick me up when I landed, ready to ship me straight back to Blighty with no photo, not even a miniature Hollywood signed souvenir for the trouble of my journey. I slanted my hat over my face, tried to scuttle away. Just as I thought I'd not been seen, Louise shrieked out that there I was, and suddenly all chaos was around me. I darted in and out of the crowds, luggage fell and people as I ran through them. The police were just behind me. I ran into an open lift and made it into one of the many car parks, hiding behind a nearby van while I considered my next move. Soon enough, they appeared. Looking around cautiously for where I might be, I held my breath. I needed to think. As I thought all hope was finally lost, a car pulled up next to me. Out of the driver's door stepped a young lady, car keys in hand. I stood up and slammed into her, picked up her keys and dived into the car. Through the closed window, she shouted her muffled, increasing protests at me as I managed to start the engine and reverse past her, and then drove past that idiotic fleeing crowd, through the security barrier and onward to freedom and the motorway ahead. The drive home cleared my thoughts and focused my mind and future intentions. I was now known and wanted. There was no way I could continue my career, and I would always be on the run unless I handed myself into the authorities and faced whatever charges they decided to put against me. I would have to start anew, afresh. I would move to a quieter area, possibly to another country. In case of Interpol, I would have to change my appearance. Abandoning my collection would not have to be necessary. I would just have to approach the task in a different manner. When I returned to my house, it was way past midnight. Knowing that the predictable police would not only be waiting outside for me, but also watching from the alleyway behind as well, I left the car in a parallel street and climbed over the first fence at the end of the terrace. I needed to get home to collect a few precious items and then make good my escape. It was a further 5 fences scaled until I reached my own back garden. I had never been much of a landscape architect, and the overgrown grass dulled the sound of my landing. The back door of the house opened with 2 forceful kicks on the lock. I would have found this ease of entry more concerning had I intended to be staying another day in the house. I would only have to take the essentials with me, and I had to return over the fences with whatever I selected for my travels ahead. I found and lit the oil lamp to guide my way. First things first, it might be days until I might sleep in a normal bed again, and I wouldn't be able to bring in any form of mattress with me. So the only thing that could possibly balance that comfort, some food and my photo collection. My camera could wait. I placed it in a box and slipped it up the bedroom chimney, jamming it in place with a larger metallic box. Even on the stoniest ground, I was sure that set of pictures would bring me relaxation and rest. I placed them into my bag one by one, and then considered what else I might take. Consideration of things like this have always been my only form of daydream, and daydream I did, as before I knew it, a good half hour had passed in that room, and only the sound of what I thought was a key in my front door jerked me violently back to reality. I hastily gathered my treasured possessions into my bag and crept into the landing. It was Barry and Louise, but they'd apparently arrived ahead of the police. I knew I should have kept the lock-picking kit for myself. They were whispering loudly, and Barry had all the stealthy calm of a drunken elephant. I needed to get to my photography room to fetch the only window key I had, but these intruders were now searching the ground floor of my house, and the chances of being caught were just too great. I decided to wait it out silently and maybe slipped down the stairs past them as they searched another room. I dimmed the oil lamp, placing it back into the back bedroom, and breathed calmly as I watched them through the crack in the room door. Louise stayed on the stairs, while Barry crept into, first the bathroom, and then the spare bedroom. He called out for her to come and see what was in there. I guess he'd spotted my collection, but then, to their misfortune, they checked to see what was in the cabinet. The editor's body slumped out and onto the floor with a wet thud. Louise screamed. Barry swore like an open sewer. The police had now arrived, and their flashing lights could be seen reflecting through into the downstairs hallway. This was my only chance. I ran in past the two idiots as they wrestled with the editor's body, grabbed the key and ran back to the back bedroom. Oil lamps are very underrated things. I threw mine into the landing, where it burst and spread flames across the floor, stopping the now oncoming Barry and Louise dead in their tracks. The flames licked up Barry's trousers as he screamed and fell backwards onto Louise, who then desperately tried to smother the fire, but it was no good. The carpet was now well and truly ablaze, and the walls started catching fire as I escaped out of the window, down onto the garden wall, and off into the car. As I drove off towards freedom, I could see the glow of the now engulfed house burning behind me in the distance. I didn't care. It had served its purpose, and I had other things to do.
Dear Jimmy, I hope you don't mind this letter out of the blue, but I found your address in one of my old school books, and I guess you might still be in the area. If this is being read by some nosy new resident, please can you pass this on to James Montague? If you have a forwarding address, I have enclosed 2 first-class stamps for your trouble. If this is indeed James reading this, I'm glad to have found you after all these years. After school, I moved away to carry on my studies at St Tristan's Sixth Form College in Barnstaple, so I managed to lose touch with practically everyone from school. But that's not such a bad thing, huh? Are you still living near your dad? How's he doing these days? I hope well. I've recently had to sell my house because of the economy and all that, but it does mean I've been able to move back to London again. I threw away a lot of stuff to charity shops as money's been so tight lately. I couldn't get a bigger place to store everything, but I kept all the books I used to read, especially those from when we were at school. Who'd be interested in those anyway, huh? I'll keep it short. It'd be good to hear from you. Maybe we can meet up for a coffee sometime. All the best, cheeky chops. Remember that. Helen Beston.
The London Evening Inquirer, excerpt from pages 3 to 4. And although he evaded authorities at the airport terminal, a spokesman for the Metropolitan Police has stated they are confident Mr. Montague is not only still in the UK, but also in the London area. All ports and airports are being monitored on full alert as a precaution. The public are advised not to approach the suspect as he may be dangerous or armed. Mr. Montague is described as...
I left the car in a country lane 4 miles from the Kent coast and walked down to the quayside of some small village. There, fortunately unlocked, I found a small boat with an outboard motor. I firstly grabbed my credit card and jammed it into the lower boards of the boat. I then, after a few moments of trying, managed to start up its motor, and as it putted away I pushed it out to sea. It sped ahead erratically for a while, before veering off to one side, and then fortunately just shot into the distance. My hope was, correctly as it later turned out, that the boat would be found adrift in the channel eventually, and with my credit card found on the boat, they would search for my body for a short while before giving me up for missing, presumed drowned. Over the next few days, I walked along the fields of the Kent countryside towards Dover. I hoped that the boat would be found within this time, and the ports would be less actively on the lookout for me. On the approach roads to the town, I found a roadside van selling low-grade bacon sandwiches and cups of tea. My first warm food for so long, I chose to ignore the hideous quality and just to relish the moment. Sometimes the memory of something is so satisfying that it can actually overwhelm the present reality of its substandard replacement. I understand divorced men go through a similar experience with their second wives, and this was particularly true with bacon sandwiches. While stuck in this thought, a lorry with livery from the Czech Republic pulled up to the stop, and the driver then attempted to ask directions towards Dover. I understood this and jumped up immediately with offers of help and, grabbing my bag, made friendly gestures towards me getting into his cab and showing him the way personally. In my view, foreigners are many things, but stupid is not one of them. They tend to be just as ignorant as anyone in the UK, but this driver at least knew immediately what I was really asking for. I pointed him in the right direction from the passenger seat and then went to hide in the back of the lorry for the ferry crossing to come. It would be sheer impracticality for port authorities to stop absolutely every vehicle that passes through their gates, and they especially don't check so much when you're actually leaving the country rather than entering. This was certainly true for us as we were waved through to board the ferry, destined for Calais. I saw no reason to take any unnecessary risks and remained hidden until we were also through to the French border. He dropped me off by the side of the road just outside the town, and I bid him my fond farewells as he sped off into the distance. The good fortune I'd found had put me in an uncharacteristically thankful mood. This did not concern me, as I was sure other people would enter my life to ensure this glitch in my life passed. The morning air was like my first breath. The sun shone brilliantly across the French countryside, and I honestly felt reborn as I started off down the road south. After a day or three of hitchhiking and again sleeping rough, I eventually found a crowd of people who'd found themselves in a new country, most likely abandoned there by some unscrupulous trader of refugees. They appeared to be looking for farm work a few miles outside of Biarritz, and stopped to ask them if they knew of anywhere that might offer me something in the way of temporary work to get by. One of them spoke a smattering of English and informed me that a van would be along soon to collect people to take them off to do field work on the outskirts of the next town. Sure enough, after a short wait, the van arrived. I soon found myself working, as I did for the next 8 months, carrying out various chores in exchange for 2 meals a day, a roof over my head, and a meagre but adequate cash-in-hand wage. This life suited me, as no one asked questions about my past, and the calm of the countryside actually made a pleasant contrast to my previous life spent in the grey city. I fell into the country life with surprising ease. I'd never been what one might call a people person, and so the minimum contacts with society at large suited me fine. I even shed the normalities of personal presentation and grew a fine-looking beard. From time to time, I would steal looks at my photo collection, remember all that had passed and all I had gone through to get what few photos I had. It kept me sane, and it got me through the days. For a while. Thoughts and considerations are the curse of the unoccupied man. I began to think of all that had happened until this point, how my life had been spent, and what I'd achieved. I thought of how Louise had betrayed me, how Barry would now have to pay more for his escorts now that he was more than likely hideously burned in the fire. Eventually my thoughts drifted to my parents, my school life, and then to Helen, my only friend, who I'd abandoned. I wondered what became of her, if she might be living a life somewhere surrounded by books with a radio playing unobtrusively in the background. The day came when I felt myself dragged mentally back home, as if some invisible wires attached to my ankles were now being reeled in. I need to finish my project, to get those final photographs, and perhaps also to find Helen. Once the harvest had been collected and work started to thin, I thanked the farm owner, bid adieu to my colleagues, and started back on the road to the coast, and eventually home. I was able to bribe a small fishing trawler to take me over the channel and set me loose with a dinghy just off Pevensey Bay, where the Coast Guard authorities would hopefully translate my almost minuscule radar signature as some flotsam or unwanted debris. This was the late 1990s after all, and a time when the steady flow of weary, tired and desperate refugees was yet to be of a more regular occurrence. My journey home was quicker than I expected, managing to hitch a lift all the way to the outskirts of London and then getting a bus almost to my own front door. The house was still gutted from the previous year's fire, and it now fit in quite comfortably with the 2 abandoned houses either side of it. The windows had been boarded up to deter squatters, curious children, though to what level I wasn't sure how much that might actually work. The house was such a state, I reasoned that nobody would expect me to return here, or, as I now decided to do, use it as my base for completing my work. Just one thing was needed. I eased myself through a loose boarding panel and let myself into the house. It was damp, decayed, charred. It didn't have the same feeling of the sanctuary of a home I remembered it to be. But even the worst situations can be saved. As someone once said, nothing is truly lost where hope still exists. I made my way up the stairs that thankfully were still intact. In my spare room, in the chimney, my camera remained. The metallic box underneath had protected it from the horrors of the flames, and the films I'd put inside were still surprisingly usable. As I went to leave the house, I found a pile of posts that had gathered up during these months in the hallway. The look of the house might have kept the local children away, but apparently the local postman isn't so easily deterred from his rounds. I put what post there was into my bag and headed off towards the high street. My mind wandered as much as my feet did that day. I could start again. Many things would need considering: where my money might come from, how I would set up my new darkroom. Many thoughts danced through my mind. I was curious as to how, if at all, my story had been reported. The local library has always had the answers. Its stock of newspaper back issues revealed how the previous 8 months had unfurled. The discovery of my actions and the subsequent investigations had been national news, although once the boat had been found, with my credit card jammed within it, the hunt for me was scaled down. Almost immediately, though, discussions had started in the press and the media in general about public perceptions of celebrities, how someone like me had been able to get access to these people so easily, and who, if anyone, should be to blame for it. It was the usual hysterical rubbish, and, as with all media fixations and trends, this story lost steam, power, and eventually was replaced by other piddling stories. There was another side to it all, though. Some magazines had taken things in a different light. They'd identified my actions as the work of an anti-hero. I was the epitome of the social outcast and tortured genius, just the type that the teenagers and the rejects of society rally behind, without actually considering the character, the deeper or truer meanings of the intentions behind a person's work. I could care less. If it wasn't for their obvious naivety, I might almost have been flattered. I found it all so typical and therefore very amusing. I went off to my beloved reference section and found a few details on a number of my photos that had not yet been achieved. I made them necessary notes and left the library. As I walked home to plot my next course of action, a gang of teenage boys walked past me. I couldn't help noticing that one of them was wearing a t-shirt that apparently had my face on it. How very ridiculous. If you want one, by the way, I've noticed that they sell them in most clothing outlets at a fairly reasonable price. I'm not sure of the image they used of me on the print. It definitely isn't one of my best pictures. You have been listening to The Dead Famous on This Is Soferville. New episodes of This Is Soferville are released at all streaming services every Wednesday. Subscribe now to get notified on its release. All music is by Shane Ivers of Silverman Sound. The Dead Famous was written and produced by Ronald Moger. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at This Is Soferville.